Hi, and welcome to Agents at Work. Today I am with Abhishek. He is a product architect at OutZero. He knows a lot about authentication and authorization, and in the internet is known as Shrek. Hi, Shrek.
Hey, I'm so excited for this one because we've chatted so far so many times on Twitter. We've run into hackathons in SF, which we both don't exist in. And so I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. For the audience, it's important for them to know that I really like this format and I'm the host, but I am not the one that came up with it. It was actually your idea. And you came with something as, well, if this is agents at work, why don't we have agents build stuff meanwhile we are chatting? And then by the end of the podcast, we actually have something that it's production ready, or at least that it works in production.
So basically, this is how you get your podcast to be like 6 hours long and you open the new, revenue stream, right?
Yeah, it's going to be like after 20 minutes, we are almost there. We're 80% done. And
Oh,
then it's the next 6 hours to get the 20%.
I was just wondering if we're going to do like a van show or it's like 6 hours of just because you're from Vancouver, right? So
Yeah,
a
I'm
six
here.
hour podcast. I don't know. I'm just making sure I and everyone watching knows what they signed up for.
So before we start coding, what made you come up with this idea of vibe coding? Like, do you do it at work? How did it come by to you?
I do vibe code a lot at work. As a product architect, a lot of our work is to figure out, like, let's say if we want to make security tool that allows bots to get access, but only the good bots and not the bad bots. That's gonna break someone's workflow. It's going to change things, and a lot of the times, rapid prototyping, building a example, presenting it to the customer, it's really fun to be able to do that live. Before agents and before Cursor or VS Code and all of these tools, like, had got like ability to generate code, that was weeks. And now the cycle time is days or hours if you're trying to do something really, really simple. And that's majority of my vibe coding at work, where if I'm talking to a customer or a prospect or even a partner, and we'll hear something like, hey, we want to do payments, but we want to do payments with identity, and we want to have something very different. It's about few hours, a bunch of MCP clients, a bunch of servers, a bunch of agents. And now you have something that is not production, but it actually teaches you, one, where exactly are the missing points. It's no longer on paper, right? So we use a vibe coding, but I personally use vibe coding a lot for that. But we also at Okta, we are committed to AI. So we are, on one hand, we are using AI at work. We are also trying to make sure that access there is secure. And then with Auth0, we want to allow developers tools to make their own agent secure.
And I know that you are really active with MCP too.
In that I'm a very abusive consumer, or in that I'm trying to, like, tell me more. What do you mean?
Both. Like, you travel a lot lately. I have been following you, and you are like always over the place in the US doing things that are like auth related or MCP related.
So the interesting thing there has been that, and maybe this is where you should pull up like a slide or like a graphic, like crossing the chasm, right? You see the early adapters, and then you have like the early majority, and they got the innovators. With MCP and agents, the interesting thing that we've found, or at least I found, is on one hand, you have startups, and they are using every piece of technology ever as infrastructure now. Someone's scraping Spotify, not Spotify, Shopify, and making stores. There are folks that are automating finance, so on and so forth, right? On the other side, there's also enterprises that are actually keeping up. So we've had some interesting interactions with some customers, and usually what we've found is MCP or any standardized system tends to be a good bet if you're talking to a team that has 15 engineers, tons of legacy services, or 100 SaaS apps that are in the scope. MCP tends to be today the right level of abstraction, where it's converting what we used to have, where agents and workflows would have a bespoke integration per app, to now a standardized reusable format. So you can build an MCP server internally, but you can tomorrow connect it to Claude. You can write an agent, and maybe if you build it using MCP, suddenly if tomorrow you no longer want to maintain an agent or you want to version update the agent, it's no longer coupled, and that tends to be very useful. And then other than that, I love technology. So MCP is like right now the cool thing, and it's unlocked so many things that I've always wanted. Always wanted Siri or something like Siri to be able to manage things like, hey Siri, turn off the lights. And it's really not there yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have overheard Siri, but she has no idea what I just said.
It also happens that you can see like this architecture of client server. It allows, if you separate it, to create platforms on the client side. Like we saw this with the browser. Like this idea of, well, at the beginning, we needed to connect things to computers. Well, there are many ways to do that. Everyone has its own app. And then someone comes up and says like, no, we have this HTTP server. An HTTP server that is going to just like get a request and reply. And then people say like, hey, wait a second. Then I can do a smart client on the client side called the browser. And then I can add a lot of stuff on top of the HTTP. It's not only like, well, return some CML or something like that back then, but actually give me HTML and I will like render it. We will have set of APIs. And I think that MCP is really good because it will allow this to happen too. Like right now, MCP servers are consuming MCP apps, but there is not yet like what's the main MCP app. Like people say like, well, maybe it's like Claude desktop or Cursor. And in reality, it's like, well, it's going to be like many of them.
And we don't even know, right? Like there's so many interesting things that you could do just with workflows, where a lot of us, we use a bunch of SaaS apps, right? Like you'll have, if you're using Notion and you have Sentry and you have dozens of different places where information is staggered, I wouldn't be surprised if like the end product there is the agent uses MCP, but ends up calling the APIs, right? And it builds something that's purpose built for what you want it to do. But today, MCP is kind of, because we're still reliant largely on a lot of adoption and adaptation, I think MCP gives us a pretty good lever to accelerate our rate of progress towards agent. And I actually wanted to, because I don't want this to be as a talking head conversation, I want to get started on MCP.
Let's go. So what do you want to build today?
So on Auth0, one of the things that we've been trying to do is we really want to make MCP super, super, super simple to build and deploy. And if you're not familiar with Auth0, we are a service that offers authentication and authorization to developers. We want to provide tools that make it really easy for you to build an app, an agent, an MCP server, an API server, whatever you're building as a developer, we want to help you make it secure, and we want to get you the flexibility to do whatever you want to build without having to get a PhD in security, right? Ideally, we want to find the balance where you design what you want to do and we help you secure it.
For startups and for like big companies, right?
Oh, yeah. If we are doing our job correctly, it should work for everyone from a one-person startup all the way to 100,000 people company, right? If we are building for people. And so one of the things that we've been looking at from the MCP side is, if you think about like most of the applications that are working today, there is an MCP client, which could be Claude, it could be VS Code. It's connecting to an MCP server and it's connecting to an API. And something that I've been saying is there's a clear difference. The MCP client is something you do not control. It could be a first party if you run both the agent and the MCP server, but for most consumers, it's going to be ChatGPT and Claude or something they're familiar with. The MCP server is something that you do control. And so for most people that are live today, let's say we use Spotify, right, for this API. Spotify, it has an API. Spotify will want an MCP server. They will want the authorization to work out of the box, right? So for what I want to do today is I want Claude to build a web server for Spotify, not a web server, an MCP server for Spotify, which should leverage Spotify's APIs. And the reason why I'm using Spotify is, one, I want to be able to vibe code while I vibe. So if I get this right, we should be able to have Cursor just, get theme music ongoing. And two, I don't have access to Spotify's source code. I have no control of their backend. And what I want to show here is how easy it is now when you can build an MCP server for an existing system without almost touching at all, like any code editor. So I'm going to go to Cursor irony is not lost on me that I just said no code editor and then proceed to go to cursor. But I'm going to go here and let me know when you can see my screen.
Excellent.
See
It's
cursor
here.
right now.
I can see it.
All right. So just for visibility, I don't have anything added here. I have Auth0, which is an MCP server that allows me to manage the Auth0 tenant. And if you want to follow along, or if you want to do this, I will open source this and you can follow along. And what I'm going to tell it cursor is, hey, can you build in MCP server for me using Auth0 as a documentation reference? I would like to be able to use Spotify. Well, actually, see, this is live prompt engineering is horrible. What I should have said is, can you build it on MCP server for Spotify for me using Auth0's documentation and reference? Context engineering, right? And I'm just going to let it cook. Cursor's nice notification aside.
Yeah, that's good. That means that you are working quite a lot. It's just telling you the notification of, by the way, you're going to run out of credits soon.
I was wondering if it was gonna, like if I had clicked Sonnet or Opus. But anyway, what I want to show you, like this prompt is basically just a documentation prompt, and it goes through best practices and how to achieve this. Idiomatically, this would just be in the Auth0 MCP server, but the practices and the techniques here apply to anything. And so it breaks that down into individual steps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep talking to you, and we should probably have this like moved over to one side of the chat and edit it out. But what it's doing is it's going to set up the server, it's going to set up the environment variables, and it's going to set up the Auth0 tenant, and it's going to write the MCP server, and it's going to add itself to cursor so that it can iterate on the tools. So I'm going to let it run now, and let's see how it goes. And how do you want it to be? Do you just want it to be keep cooking as we keep talking?
For me, that's okay, and I think that it's really good because most of the people we don't have patterns on how to use these tools, and then there are many people living at the fringe, or like just like pushing a lot for this. And even something that we did here was like, well, you started adding like a really small prompt that just said like, hey, build me this, but then you had an Auth0 MD with documentation. Which is extremely important. I think that most of the people, like that was a long document that you wrote and iterated, right?
Oh, not really. The way I got to the document is using Opus. So I told Opus what I want. And the pattern that I want Opus to follow is something we call token vault. The idea is that we can obtain an access token for Spotify, and then we can make it available to MCP server. And then I let Opus research it and write the prompt. So that prompt itself is byte coded.
Nice. Okay. And did you read it before, or you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I went through a few iterations, and Opus is not going to one-shot it, right? So I went through a couple of iterations, but the idea is that if you had in future, if you install an MCP server, idiomatically, this should be a part of that MCP server. So the prompt should be, or a prompt template should be, build me an MCP server for variable name, and then you just type and you're good to go.
Yes. Yeah.
But for the sake of this conversation, because I want it to be here early as we can, I just skip that whole thing.
It's good. This is something that is important because I insist. I think that for a lot of people, this is the first time that they're going to see, like, listen, whenever you ask the agent to do something, you need to add a lot of context that you have been cleaning and putting there, because something that machines are bad at, it's about reading your mind. Like they cannot just say, I know exactly what Shrek wants today, let me build it. But something that they are really good at, it's getting into the zone in microseconds. So you can bring them as much context as you want inside the context window, no? But give them all the information, and it takes them fractions of a second. It's like, okay, I know exactly what I am doing right now. So the only thing is that documentation was sometimes bad for people, or people didn't want to use it because, well, people don't read documentation, other developers, but agents do.
I think it's also very interesting because agents are also, I don't want to use it from lazy, but their reward functions are also like biased towards doing a specific amount of work. So you'll see this as like, and what I love about Cursor is they show you the amount of context it has left. And as you start getting towards the higher end of context window, you'll start seeing it struggle. So one of the techniques that I follow a lot is I tend to include references. I tend to include some debugging steps for like based on like my practices and examples before, so that the agent has one, the ability to fetch additional documentation, but it's not like fed to it. I think labeled uses this example that, hey, imagine if every day at work, someone forced you to read like 14 books, and then you could like do the first thing that you needed to do, which was like maybe uh, read a PR review. You would hate it because most of it is irrelevant. So the human technique of like, hey, give me the tools, give me the resources, give me some ways to find what I need, but don't like be
Yes.
incredibly prescriptive, still applies for agents. So I want to touch back because there's a bunch of things that this is doing, and I want to just make sure I go over all the things it has done so far. So it did a couple of things here, and one of the things it did is it set up a Spotify MCP server for us, which is a clone of my Vercel Hono MCP template. And I'm just going to go very quickly over it. It's just the template from the Vercel team with Auth0 as a additional library, which allows me to validate tokens and so on, right? So this is a very basic wrapper for Vercel's MCP adapter, and it runs on Vercel. What
Nice.
the agent did in this past like 10 minutes or so, or 5 minutes or so, is create a clone for it. And then it set up a bunch of environment variables. So it set up the Auth0 tenant, it set up the resource URL, which is going to be the MCP server when it's running. It also set up a bunch of deployment scripts, and I'm going to show this, but please do not run these at like, I'm going to rotate these secrets after the demo. So what it did is it created like this template for me to be able to set up the tenant, and the agent will continuously use these scripts and these environment variables to deploy changes to Auth0, as well as to read logs. It uses the MCP server. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to follow the human step here, which is to go ahead to Spotify and copy paste a bunch of client ID and client secrets. Now, I'm not going to go into the full discussion of like what exactly that looks like. This is documented, but if you were having trouble, you could also just ask, hey, in order to, hey, how do I obtain the Spotify OAuth to credentials? Help me. And the interesting thing there is we actually abandoned this step, and we're going to ask it to first give me advice on how do I find these credentials.
Yeah.
This is also an interesting thing that agents allow you to do, where you no longer now have to go to a documentation. It will
Yeah.
just talk to you. And I wouldn't be surprised if like a year from now, if you read this, it would have just used browser use to open and create this on its own. So it ran the script and it told me like, hey, there's a couple of things here. One is that it can't read .m.deploy because it's get ignored out.
Mhm.
So that's something that I think we need to improve as an industry. When agents and humans interact on secure assets, how do we give them operate only access so they can read the credentials, but they know that the credentials exist, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell it, hey, I have created and updated the variables. Can you run the deployment script and then continue on?
This is incredibly important because many of these patterns are already solved even with people. Like many times, if you work in a big corporation, you are able to deploy stuff, you're able to interact with variables, but you're not able to see the production value. Like you are able to say, like, here, I am using the variable that connects me with, I don't know, like my credit card provider, but the engineer is not able to say, like, well, what's the production key for this exactly?
I mean, another interesting thing here is agents can also recover. So in this case, it figured out, and I kind of like stole my own thunder for the demo, but it figured out that the grant has not been created in the Auth0 dashboard, which we don't allow it on purpose, because if it could create, it could very easily do privilege escalation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share a different window, go to Safari, and grant me access to the API. So I go to Safari, I go here, And all I'm going to do is go to Auth Management API for just to make sure that we can go through it quicker. What the agent did is it created a deployment helper, and this is its CI/CD tool. I'm just going to give it all access so that it doesn't run into any more issues. Ideally, it just needs access to create clients and create resource servers.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to now go back to Cursor. While I did that, it understands that it can multitask. So while I went ahead and did that, Cursor was still cooking, and it ended up further going to generating a deep link, right? So I can now tell it, hey, I updated the nvars. Oh, sorry, I granted the permission. You should be able to deploy now. One more thing I want to call out is it's actually running this server live right now.
Nice.
So if I go to focus, it's live reloading the Hono MCP server so that it can connect to it itself. So I'm going to run the deployment script again. And it figured out that it has created a YAML syntax error. It's going to fix the YAML syntax error, and amazing. GenAI demos are always fun. I thought it would take 20 minutes for running this.
Yeah, I think it was much less than that.
Yeah. I'm more amused that it was the first time it actually made that error. The tenant YAML is just a configuration file. And what we've also found interesting is agents, if they will use a variety of tools. So MCP is not the only way. This is a pre-existing CLI tool with a lot of documentation. So it just knows how to use it out of the box. And that's why I'm mixing and merging the MCP as well as this tool here. The best part, what I like about it, is it also understands how quickly it can accommodate these examples. And it found an error. It wants to fix it on its own. Here, I'm going to actually override, and I'm going to undo these changes. And this actually brings me to a question for you. Even though I have said that there are very specific things, it tends to try to fix it because the ideal client here, should be resource server. But because it has never seen something as resource server identifier, it tends to keep reverting it back to something it has seen before, which is a machine-to-machine client. So Jordi, I have a question for you, because you're a lot more into these agents at work. How are other people, or how are you solving it internally at FewSats? How are you using agents where if they make a mistake, you're being able to teach them, hey, this is new information, and you may not want to go down this rabbit hole?
Yes. So unfortunately, they are not like people and they don't have memory. So they don't learn per se. So
Mhm.
when you have an employee, you're able to say, like, hey, here is how we do things. And then the next day, you tell them again, like, hey, here is how we do things. And then after 1 week, they already know how to do things. With LLMs, usually this does not happen. And then there are like two things. One is like custom things that we do here that are not common patterns in the out wall. Those ones you need to just document them and show them. Like, listen, this is how we do things here. Here you have some examples. And then the more you see it failing, the more you're able to trail and say, like, hey, remember that this is how we do things here. Something that also really helps is to try to break it in pieces. So many times, for example, if they are writing some kind of special, like imagine like we have like some things for coding and some things for testing. For example, we have like unit tests, fixtures to, like the HTTP client to patch them. And then we have the normal code. We break it in such a way that it's like, I don't ask you for the whole task. And then like, by the way, remember that for the test, you need to do this. And for the fixtures, you need to do this, etc.
So one applicable thing here could have been that instead of breaking it down into multiple, like into a single prompt, I could have potentially instructed in the prompt, hey, you will need to break this down into multiple steps. And you might want to call your garbage collector to reset your expectations.
Yes.
Interesting.
And usually we also do like, you do this like multiple times. So you learn what the machine is missing or what biases it has. So usually you can do things like, for example, if this is on testing, Imagine, like, we have some libraries for testing. I want you to use these ones, and I want you to use these patterns. I don't want you to do whatever you think that is the best standard, whatever you have seen the most. I want you to accommodate to this. Many times what we do is like, no, first you write the code, and then forget about the test for now. Like, just write the code, and then when the code is written, this is anti-TDD, but we can also like start on test to the test. But then we make sure that something that touches one part of the pipeline doesn't need to be remembered or biased when it's doing something else. So we don't want to say like, oh, by the way, remember that now that you're writing this code, when you write the test, you have to do these things. No, it's better to say like, well, forget about writing the test now. Write the thing. Now that you're writing the test, let me bring you this context. So this idea of breaking it, you can imagine the same with authentication. So you want to bring authentication to your app, you want to have it for your controllers, you want to make sure, but usually you have like some specific things, not like, oh, we have users that are created with OAuth and they don't have an email, but only with Google we allow this because we do like blah, blah, blah. But you don't want to bring this all the time. You say like, well, when you're writing the thing, forget about authorization for now. You can assume that it's authorized here. And then the next task, now let's focus only on authorization. By the way, here it's all the information for our auth stack.
Interesting. So actually, what would be really cool is if Cursor and VS Code had like a sub-agent mode.
Yeah.
And that would, that I wonder if almost like I wish Claude Code has a sub-agent mode.
Yes. And now Cursor too, but I don't use them because for now, for me, sub agents are just
too unpredictable.
Exactly. So I can do it concurrently, or I can do like sequentially, but it's the same set of operations. Right now, I am the bottleneck. I am still learning. So I want it sequentially, so I am able to learn.
So what you want is a super agent.
Yes, like eventually we're going to get there.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to try to share my entire screen because there's a couple of things I want to show. Because again, we've made a little bit more progress, and this is going to make people a little bit squeamish. Sorry about that. Let me try to hide the.
There we go.
Okay. So there's a couple of things, and what we have done here in Auth0 is we have actually added support for this associated client. So if you think about it, an MCP server is a server, right? Like it's an API. It's close to an API server. It's a resource in the OAuth language. But it also wants to call other services. So in our example, Claude or Cursor will connect to Spotify MCP server. But this MCP server now needs to call the actual Spotify API. So what we are allowing you to do now is this ability to create an associated client. So they are kind of paired. And this concept or this pattern is reusable because you can leverage this for your own services. You can leverage this for third-party services. It gives you a lot more flexibility. So what I'm going to do here, and just to show you, like their Spotify is a connection, and I just wanted to capture like everything that the agent was able to do while this is talking, right? So it set up a social connection, which is a way to authenticate in Auth0 for Spotify, for which it wrote code. It took care of all of it. It discovered where these URLs are, how to configure them, what scopes it needs. It built the API, the MCP server. It configured it, and it also built an associated client so that they could be used. And I'm just going to make sure everything, like this is a default app. So the scenario here is like, this is not like, if this was someone else, you could also imagine like a dashboard where you can see what songs you've heard, right? So this works on top of our existing, if you have an existing Auth0 tenant, or if you're using something, this would work in collaboration. I just want to call that out because nothing that we're doing here is like a hack or a one-off for this one time. What it also did is it enabled the dynamic client registration so that Cursor and Claude can actually register themselves.
Can you say why this is important for ChatGPT and Claude? Like, what is dynamic registration and why we didn't have it, like we needed that much before and we need it now?
So dynamic client registrations in OAuth solve a problem of when there are two entities that have no business relationship, that have no existing knowledge of each other, how do they talk to one another? And I'll give you an example which is more common. Imagine if you have lived in multiple countries, right? So imagine a bank in Spain wants to make a transfer to a bank in Argentina. that in order for the service to service communication to happen, there needs to be some kind of a trust relationship. But if we pre-configured it, every bank and every financial institution on the planet would have a client ID and client secret for every other. So that doesn't work. That credential provisioning needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be able to almost be decentralized. Now, up until this point, the way OAuth clients work is there's a client ID, and that's almost like it's an alphanumeric random string, and either a secret or a private key or some kind of way of validating that the client is who they are, right? This part requires provisioning. Someone has to go and create it. Dynamic client registration allows you to create these clients on the fly. So say a machine that starts up, it needs to call an API. It will check, hey, how do I access you? And the API tells you, I need an access token from example.com. It goes to example.com and says, hey, I want to call this API. I need a pair of credentials. That part is handled by a dynamic client registration. There are many variants of it. One of which we are going to be using is open dynamic client registration, where any application on the entire internet that has a TCP/IP interface is going to be able to register a client. And that's one of the biggest problems. Because it's any application, you don't really know who you're talking to. So it has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, and its strength is it allows almost anonymity, it allows open connectivity, but its weakness becomes that while doing so, it gives a maintenance and security nightmare. You can just run hundreds of them. So if you're following the MCP spec, there is another variant, or there's another alternative now, which is called client ID metadata, which converts the client ID to a URL itself. So when VS Code wants to connect, it won't be 001 on my machine, 050 on yours, and 01000 on someone else's machine. It will just be vscode.dev. And what this allows us to do is remove that pre-provisioning and still keep it dynamic, but now you have the DNS infrastructure. You can have domain allow lists, and you can have all sorts of things that we know about locking and allowing domains being able to be leveraged. So that was a big tangent into dynamic client registration. But hey, in order for Claude to talk to Auth0, it needs to be able to register itself. That's one of the big things that we saw. Like Spotify's APIs today are, at least the last time I checked, they don't have PCR. Plus, they don't have an MCP server. So while Claude has been cooking, it has built both of those. It's using Auth0 for authorization and dynamic client registration. And then it wrote the MCP server itself. Let me go back to what I want to show you though. So now, if I go back and if everything is fully configured, what we should have is for Claude to be able to for Cursor to be able to generate a URL. And it's teaching me how to open it. Now, it's 1 in 10 chance, but what I would really love is if there was some kind of a way to just auto configure it. So I'm just going to tell it, just run the command. And when it will do that, I'm going to let it run. And what it does is it actually opens Cursor's built-in handling for adding new MCP servers. So now what I could do is I could click install, and it's connecting to the MCP server that it wrote.
That is running right now in localhost.
That is running right now. And so if I try to connect, it should now show me that my Auth0 tenant, which is configured for this demo, wants to authorize, and it will give me a URL. I click on open. This will take me to a consent prompt, and I am fully enabled. Now,
That's important. Now you have done OAuth. So the MCP server that we built is a client on OAuth for Spotify. But then it's also the server OAuth for all the MCP clients that installed or connect to that server.
Yes. Now, there is a small difference here. There's a nice logout button here.
Yes. So that that's even better.
So let's go ahead and let's sign it again. And I want to actually show what that looks like if you were doing it the first time, right? So you see this continue with Spotify because we're actually proxying the token here. We're not actually writing, like if in a real world, this would be the Spotify login page. We're not going to go there because this is the first time we have introduced a mediator service. So if you were to build and apply this technology and you owned this API, this would be your login page. You click on continue with Spotify, and now Spotify runs its consent prompt that shows Spotify MCP server wants to connect you and email, and this is the service that we have built. So in this scenario, the Auth0 tenant is the OAuth client for the Spotify authorization server, and the MCP server is the client under Auth0. What this allows us to do is we can now have Auth0 store the tokens and everything else, and we can just focus on writing a good MCP server. So it uses my bot account, and now it has access to the tools. Now, this is where the more fun magic begins. Okay, it worked. Now, can you actually improve the tools and build them? And as you build the tools, let's also change music. Well, try to sync the music on Spotify.
By the way, something really cool here is like who ran the server? Like, did you instruct it to run it and then it's doing it in the background?
Yeah, it just started the server. Cursor started the server on its own, and it just has this background terminal that it can see. So the couple of cool things that enables is, one, it can see the tool's response from the MCP server. But two, if it makes a blunder, it can see what it did and fix it live. So
Yes.
now that everything is set up, it's going to go ahead, install a Spotify Web SDK, which it found from NPM.
This
It's
is really
then going to
important
learn
because
how. Huh?
it shows the new pattern that we are doing here. It's like at the beginning, it was a chat that could only see the code. Now it's a chat that can interact with tools and have them running in the background. So it has like some kind of workspace.
Yeah. And the coolest thing that I find is it's also connected to the terminal on its own, right? So it knows the MCP server that it's using and how it's running.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
there was a
So
bug and in a tool call, it can get the stack trace and fix it live and just restart the MCP server.
yeah. I think that this one has no bug, but mine does, and I can vouch saying like this is true because this morning this was working.
So here is an example, right, where it now knows, hey, I need an access token from Token Vault. So it updated that code. And now it's going through one at a time, updating the tools. And as it tries to do so, it goes ahead and it now has built like an MCP, like it made a Spotify Play tool. I'm just going to keep that, and I'm going to remove the other. I'm just going to keep all its full vibe, right? It's calling the Spotify API using the Spotify package. And I'm honestly surprised how quickly it actually gets to this point, right? So now it says test my connection, let's test them out. One thing that you have to note right now is you will have to enable and re-enable the tools, because I don't think anyone yet implements the tool call updated or tools updated in a way. But I think that's something that Cursor and VS Code and other developers can fix rather quickly. But the
Yes.
only thing that I have to do is each time I declare a new tool, I have to go back and restart and disable and enable it. So it just force reloads the new tools. But now let's go ahead and give it a try. And I'm going to bring Spotify up so that you can see what it actually changes. This connection, the parameters, server responded with an error response body, and it has a full detailed breakdown of why. So let's see why it's doing so. And my guess was that I had blundered in copy pasting admin credentials. Let's see if it can actually figure that out. Do you think what would be a cause of such an error?
It's curious here that it saw the error and then it tried to execute another command instead of fixing it. Like here we had to help saying like, listen, let's fix this before calling another one.
I wonder if it was just thinking that if it's just one tool that has an error
Yeah.
or another tool.
Yes.
Let's see what it thinks. Required manual fix. Yeah. You'll need to manually enable blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go to the dashboard. I don't think that's the actual error, but I'll follow its advice. It wants me to go to Spotify associated client and connections. Oh, Spotify is enabled. I'll give it a screenshot. That is enabled. And what else would cause such a bug? Can you check logs?
Now,
So here's an interesting thing that
mhm,
Auth0 has logging for this. So even though we have been able to see these error logs, what's even more interesting is it can actually just filter the Auth0 logs and try to figure out exactly what was the error that happened.
which is amazing. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Like, does the other tool that you already had installed, that it's Auth0, does it
Mhm.
has anything to show the logs so it gets that context? And the answer is yes. And actually, even before I asked you, the bot already, like the AI was already trying to get there.
And
And
what I find very interesting is it's actually found the associated client is up to date. Now, I do know why it's failing. And should I give it a hint or should we just let it, take a while?
what do you think that it's better? Like, do you think that we'll find it or not?
I don't know. It has been able to find that before and it hasn't been able to find that sometimes because I think what happened is it's being confused because I set up the environment variables.
Mm-hmm.
However, I had made a mistake.
I see. So then I could do the hint as if it was a real employee, like a coworker. You could say like,
Possible
"Well,
that the what are the possible reasons for a kind of and this is actually a very good point for like anyone else watching and I know we're sliding to get on time but one of the things that a pattern that now we need to start thinking about is what are the scenarios where in this case instead of returning an unauthorized error if it would have said unauthorized because of an invalid client that would have been an instant error for it.
yeah, that makes sense."
And it gave a bunch of root causes. Might be missing the proper resource server association. It has that. The connection scope mismatch. Uh, well, those are specific to token vault. Think more broadly. What are the common configuration?
By the way, these AI agents are going to start hitting some errors once and again, and they just have their own patterns. Like they are exploring like what kind of things they can build. And I think that it's going to be needed something like Stack Overflow. Like
Mhm.
you are going to learn how to fix this. Like, oh yeah, this is the second time that we have this client problem. Let me just put it on you're going to put it on your own auth 0.md. But I think that there are going to be many other agents that are hitting the same problem. And instead of solving it, it's like, hey, did any other AI agent or any other programmer ever hit this? And it's going to be like, yeah, actually, yes, this is how you fix it.
I wonder if it will now understand what happened. It's I had to give it a very, very direct clue. But I think I'm gonna like I'm
Yeah,
going to I'm going to bail it out and I'm going to copy paste the client credentials for it.
you can fix it for him.
Yeah, I'll fix it for it because I don't think that this is a challenge that we'll also have to deal with where we'll need to make our tooling a little bit better so that something like this instantly raises an error.
Yes.
Okay. So it seems I have forgotten. It actually did see the end file. Okay,
Needs to be retrieved. Yes. And
I
now it was trying to do it by itself.
retry. So again, back to the point. We've been on this call for like what?
50 minutes now.
50 minutes and we've been chatting, we've discussed, and it has now gotten I think it needs to restart the server.
Yeah. This is what we were talking about before.
Have you thought about restarting the server?
This is really important because it doesn't know that, okay, it will go to .env and say like, hey, wait a second, but the things are there. Like why?
Yeah.
And then it will happen the same like with humans. Like, okay, so maybe it's something else. And it's like, no, everything is correct.
Also, this is very interesting, right? It's using pkill minus find and giving it the process to kill as opposed to just starting to kill
Yeah,
the
click
server,
around.
right? So let's see what happens there. I don't think it will actually kill the process. Yeah.
This is
So
something actually that it's important because many times I want to know, like, wait a second, what version of the code am I running? And what helps for that is a lot of versioning and having like the hashes.
Mhm.
To say like, well, is it this exact, like the code that I am reading? More than once, I spend a lot of time trying to fix a problem that it's already fixed. The only thing is that I am running the old version of the code that doesn't have the fix. I think that this is really important for LLMs too, to be able to retrieve and say like, well, wait a second, the code that we're running is the code that I am seeing is the one that I am running, and I haven't seen in MCP a lot of this yet.
Oh, this is very interesting because now we're getting LS OFISI TCP 3000. There's something that's listing on TCP 3000.
Did we kill it manually?
I'm going to actually retry restart just by telling it.
And I also see some files in red. Do they compile?
The compiling shouldn't be a problem. I think it's more just
Okay. Linter
because I'm
stuff.
using TSINT, right? So I'm
Okay.
using TSX. So TSX will run the file unless there's a syntactical error. But I think something else is using 3000 now, and I'm not sure what.
Something that happened to me was an order of this workspace that cursor controls was using a staff. And for that, what I have used is right there. Do you see that says like cursor CD, like where you have terminal that says like terminal ports and things like that?
Wow, it just went full blown LS kill -9. Let's see if this time it will succeed. Oh yeah.
You see, it's one of these,
finally.
exactly.
Wow.
Perfect.
So at this point, we have learned that it's better at killing processes than I am.
Yeah. Well, he nukes them.
And
so that you know that is the good thing.
And there we go. It was able to obtain a Spotify token. And now we're going to use Spotify search. So I'm actually going to just have Spotify side by side for this part. And I'm going to make my windows a little bit smaller. By the way, I have used Spotify, but you could actually use basically any API.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you ability to play with prototyping and whatnot. Wow, this poor bot account is going to get so much spam. No active devices found.
Is it with the same account?
Yeah, it's the same account because I haven't been actually playing anything. Why don't you play some?
Because it's clearly communicating with Spotify.
Yep. No track is currently playing. Let me try to play a track and search. Oh my. It's very top 20, top 30 heavy. Yeah, I think I'll have to like play something and let it change.
Okay, so this is was Skrillex and you played it manually. So now we can ask like, hey, like, does it know what it's playing? I guess yes.
Yeah. I think this Spotify API has a limitation that it can't just start playing unless there's an active device.
I see. That would make sense.
Yeah, so it's able to see that it's Skrillex playing, and now it's going to try to change it. Now it wants to play Queensbound. This is very interesting. It's music choices. There you go.
This is amazing.
Now, tools and the prompts used here at Spotify to align the vibe coding, i.e. it bugs, well, i.e. align music with how you feel.
With the this is pretty cool because also you are giving something that is like pretty subjective. Like, listen, why don't you improve the code?
Yeah.
That it's already pretty clear. It's like, improve how? Just do it. Okay, like I want the prompt and the code to be better, and I want you to play music in the meantime.
Yeah, and also notice something else. It's actually responding in text. It chose to actually convert the Spotify JSON response into text because it's a lot more context aware. So if this was the JSON response, it'd be way larger, but it only cares about the search results like a human would, right?
Yeah.
And it's playing those tracks effectively based on the least amount of information it needs because it hasn't seen a reason for it.
Yeah. So right now it's fixing some bugs, and what it decided to play?
It decided to play Awake by Tycho. Why? I don't know.
It depends how it feels.
I know. I told it to play how it feels. It feels awake. I think that's how
Okay,
the Terminator starts.
so let's see. We had a bit of like a couple of road blockers that the bot was able to solve by itself.
Yeah.
There was only one moment that seemed that it wasn't working, and it was because actually Spotify doesn't allow you to change the music unless there is one that it's already sounding.
Yeah.
For the rest, what did we instruct it with? And in 40 minutes, what was it able to
We
build?
instructed it with I want to be able to listen. Well, I want an MCP server for vibe coding with Spotify, and we now have an MCP server for vibe coding with Spotify. What I'll try to do is I'll try to deploy it, and I'm sure I could just ask it to use Vercel MCP and deploy it. But I'll try to host it out so that people, when in a couple of days, you should be able to just tune in live and just play with it.
We can do that. I don't know about Vercel. I know that Cloudflare also has some stuff there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Vercel also has something for hosting them even.
One thing I do find Vercel interesting about is Fluid, though, where
Yes.
Fluid Compute means that when it's actually calling the backend API, I'm not paying anything for it. So just a little bit of bias there, but the triangle does work in my favor.
And this was pretty crazy because you work a lot with developers. Many people that spend a lot of time on OAuth stuff because of the company that you are. Like you are like the most famous company on OAuth. Like there are many, many experts there. But then when you talk as a product architect with people like developers that are good developers, but they are not OAuth savvy, how hard is for them to wrap with this kind of concepts of OAuth versus a bot, an AI agent that already comes equipped with it? Like here, we didn't fight much on. The only moment that we fought was like, hey, I need these two things, like the client ID and the secret.
And to be honest, the bot was set up for failure. If it had an easy way to check and validate the environment, it would have just been like, no, those variables do not look accurate. Which brings me to like wafers.
Yeah.
Inadvertently is one way to think about it. Like imagine if the bot had a token that says, hey, I want to see the end file. I don't want to see the entirety of it. I just want to see the first 4 characters of the client ID and client secret, which should have been sufficient for it to know that these are templates.
Yes.
Right. And I'm going to call out wafers here because I feel like most people understand better something like wafers. Or if I give you, say, $300 and you need to get something done, every human understands that they will not be able to spend more than $300. But they can downscope and they can give $10 for one part of the task and so on and so forth. So in the payments world, that's very clear. When we're talking about like OAuth is a very, very, very abstract protocol. And it's largely a protocol that talks about how machines can obtain tokens with people's consent to do things on people's behalves. That's very abstract. Like just saying that was the most abstract thing I've said on this podcast so far, right? Now, when you start applying that, it gets harder and harder depending on the context involved, right? In this case, there are 5 different machines talking to each other. I have Auth0, I have the MCP client, I have the MCP server, Spotify has its own authorization server, and there's the Spotify server. And then there's the Spotify app that's playing the music, right? So in this scenario, there's 8 different interactions possible. For a human, that's very complex.
Yes.
And what I found interesting is agents are very quick at building repeatable building blocks. But when it comes to solving this, connecting the dots, humans are still very, very, very useful. So I feel like the idiomatic thing to do here would be someone who's good as an engineer or a product architect or just understands security. Giving them access to an agent makes OAuth more accessible for them so that they can talk to OAuth, get an idea of what they're trying to achieve. And the agent does the last mile of like, hey, I'm going to write these 400 lines of code for you or these 500 lines of code for you that actually gets the job done.
Yes. They are really good at exactly that task and they are able to communicate. Hey, actually, the trade offs are this and that. Something that also I think that OAuth is a really powerful protocol. It can model everything. I don't know if anyone ran Doom on OAuth, but I'm sure that you can do it. Like
I'm sure I can do it. So
exactly.
actually, that is something like if you guys want to that could be a 2-hour vibe coding session where we actually abuse OAuth and we just have a single client where the response from the token is a frame. We should be able to have like Doom and with a SPA client and an OAuth server, but the Doom server runs in the OAuth server. I'm sure my boss would love me for 100 FPS.
We can do that on a weekend. Like one weekend, like we can do like one morning and then we leave having Doom there. And then,
That would be
eventually we
great.
will be able to have like Minecraft.
Yeah.
But it's really powerful. But until now, like most of the people has modeled it saying like, well, software is static. We know what it has to do. And then we give the credentials, like the minimum credentials for what it has to do. And the problem with agents is that they are too generic. Like they want to do everything and you want them to do everything, but you don't want to get them admin credentials when you say, like if I say like, oh, play some music now, I don't want you to be able to delete my collection of music just because I want to listen to some music now. But when I say like, hey, remove this song, I want you to be able to do it, but only when I tell you remove the song, not all the time.
Mm-hmm. No,
and I think
I
like
agree.
Wayfair can help there. And OAuth will have to not evolve, but maybe like be twisted a bit and say like, well, this is already supported, but was not pushed in that direction to be able to accommodate all this. I think that you have a slide, or you shared it on Twitter, really famous, with cars going and saying,
I know what you're talking about. I think you're talking about this one.
yes, for people listening about this, like it's a car, it's on the road, and says like, well, the road is software. Like this is how the car is software. This is how software behaves right now. And now AI agents are a plane. It's not a car anymore. It's a plane. So it's a new dimension. Like the same things that we use for the cars, for example, a traffic light, it's not enough for a plane. Like it doesn't make
I
sense.
can't imagine like a really tall traffic light reaching all the way to 30,000 feet and be like, no, it's a red light, so the airplane has to stop. It just wouldn't work, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
I feel like that's something where we are, as a security industry, are going to head to, where we're going to have to learn new ways of access control. On a road, everything is direct. All of our access patterns today are very direct. An app will call an API with this such and such scope. That app will have a signed binary that cannot automatically change, right? That's the pattern we model today. We have CSR, we have like cross-site scripting protection and all the stuff to make that work in a browser. None of that exists for agents today, and maybe none of that makes sense for agents, because the entire point of agents is they can take a shorter path. So the reason why I came up with that analogy is if you want to go from like Vancouver to Seattle, where I am, it's almost a straight line, but it's not really a straight line. And an airplane just flies as the crow does. It's a much faster journey and it's connected things faster. Agents allow you to do that. Instead of going through Jira and clicking 400 buttons to get a list of what you need to work on next, you can just ask Claude, hey, what is the most important thing that I need to work on? And it can go to Jira, but it can also grab information from Confluence and maybe even look up code in GitHub to give you a very summarized summary as an engineer. It's like, hey, today you're supposed to work on such and such. Here's a small list of what you will need to do first to get to it, right?
Yes.
That to me feels like taking a flight to where I want to get to, as opposed to having to drive manually. So I feel like security will also have to adapt to this freedom that we now have. And I think that some of the innovation there will have to be like, you'll need a more connected security infrastructure, and you'll also need a more fine-grained model where you perform a task that has a subtask that has a subtask. The agent itself, or the inference layer itself, will at some point want to be able to delegate off a task on behalf of itself, but not give it admin keys, as you call it, right? Like when we give an access token to Claude, we're basically given it admin keys.
Yes.
And I feel like that traffic light will need to change into some kind of an air traffic control. That's
Yes.
I think that's what I've just done is a show business nightmare of like taking people who understand jokes about airplanes and air traffic control and intersecting them with OAuth, which is probably like 2 people on the planet.
You can tell this to ChatGPT, maybe it laughs. Like, that for sure, at least the bot has enough context now to laugh at the joke. Perfect, Shrek. So I wanted to thank you for your time here to build this. I'm sure that the audience will love to try Shopify, Spotify, vibe coding, MCP server by AI agents. I think that it's really hard for people who think that it's a bubble that's going to blow up that doesn't bring any value. When you see these two people having a conversation, we have Slack time to make jokes about OAuth, and even so, the bot is able to build what we were set to.
I mean, here's the crazy thing. It was actually still cooking. It implemented a new search tool, which is not in the Spotify API. It implemented a mood-based search feature that it just did. And now I'm going to tell it I restarted it and reconnected you. Spotify plays similar. It got a 404 from Spotify. It built a tool that it can iterate over.
Yes. Something that happens here too is that it didn't iterate it much because it could not run, so it cannot see the errors. So now, for example, that we are letting run stuff, fixes it extremely fast.
Wow.
No
This is
problem.
very interesting because it's trying, like, this is the cool part of, I mean, to me, this is actually cooler than a working demo because it's showing you it attempting and trying to fix itself. When did we have the ability to do that?
Yeah, no. Like even 2 years ago, I did not imagine that was going to be like this fast out of the box. So I knew that it was possible, but I was like, wow, we need a lot of planning for this.
And
Reality is that we don't need that much planning. Like AI agents are able to do it, and yeah, it's already fixed and
holy
working.
shit.
Amazing.
Wow. This is awesome. And I'm not making this up. It literally started playing this.
Excellent. So where do people can find more about? I will share the links to the tool itself, but about you.
I'm on Twitter on Shrekoverflow, which is a pun on Stack Overflow. Ask me why when you follow me. And other than that, auth0.ai is live. You can go to auth0.ai. That will take you to our current developer preview and developer beta. And we are at Octane. You're gonna publish this on Wednesday. So I have a session on Thursday that talks about how to do this and go from Spotify to Salesforce.
Nice.
So when your sales team is losing deals, we start playing their horror music on their Spotify's. No,
Yeah, like
do not quote me on that.
motivational, not scary music or horror music, like
Motivation.
motivational. So you can go like when you're in spinning. Perfect. I really like the format. Like I'm going to do this with many more people because it's great. Thank you very
What'd
much.
be really good is we should have decks and others, and we should have like different types. Like this is security engineering. I'm sure decks can have
Yes.
like sub agents.
Yeah, I mean the format of like having the agent build stuff. Meanwhile, we chat.
Who can build the agent that can make a movie live? And I love chatting with you. You should totally do, if someone's hearing this, sponsor Jordi's videothon. He has a great idea on that.
Thank you very much, Abhishek. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one.